chair was already taken. Not moved to another spot, not pushed aside by accident. Taken. Someone else's jacket was draped over the back of it, and a place card with a name I didn't recognize was sitting right where my coffee cup should have been. I stood at the entrance of my son's dining room on Thanksgiving Day, holding a bottle of Merlot I'd picked up on the way over, and I just stood there, counting the chairs, counting the people, counting the peel, counting the ways I'd somehow become invisible in a room I'd helped pay for. I should back up. That's not where this story starts. My name is Robert. I'm 63 years old, retired 2 years ago after 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. I have a house in Tucson that's paid off, a pension that covers my basics, and until recently, one son, Colin, who I believed, with everything in me, was a good man. His mother passed when he was 26. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel, the way that disease always is. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis. After that, it was just the two of us, and I think the grief welded us together in a way that felt permanent. We called each other on Sundays. We had a standing lunch the first Saturday of every month. When he met Amber, I genuinely liked her. She was sharp, funny, kept Colin accountable in ways I couldn't from across town. They got married 3 years ago. Small wedding, backyard ceremony at her parents' place in Scottsdale. I wrote a check for $12,000 to cover the catering and the photographer because Colin had just taken a new job and cash was tight. I didn't think of it as a loan. I thought of it as a father doing what fathers do. I still think that. What changed wasn't the money. What changed was what the money eventually meant to them. 6 months after the wedding, Colin called me on a Tuesday, not a Sunday, a Tuesday, and I knew before I even answered that something was off. He said he and Amber had found a house, a good house, in a neighborhood with good schools, even though they didn't have kids yet. The mortgage payment was going to stretch them thin for a while, and they were wondering, just wondering, if I might be able to help bridge the gap for the first year or so. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds. How much are we talking? $1,800 a month, he said, just until we get our feet under us. I said yes. I started sending $1,800 on the first of every month, automatic transfer like clockwork. I told myself it was temporary. They'd said a year. I believed them. That was 2.5 years ago. In that time, I also co-signed a loan for Amber's car when her credit score wasn't high enough to qualify on her own, a $34,000 SUV, because she'd decided her old Civic wasn't reliable enough for the commute to her new marketing director job. I put $4,500 toward a kitchen renovation they said would increase the home's value. When Colin's firm had a rough quarter and he came home stressed about his bonus being cut, I quietly transferred $6,000 into their joint account and told him not to worry about it. I want to be clear, I never kept score. I'm not a man who writes things down in a ledger and waits for the balance to even out. I gave because I could, and because he was my son, and because every time I helped, he'd call me the next day and say, "Dad, I don't know what we'd do without you." And for a man who'd been rattling around a quiet house since his wife died, those words meant more than I probably should have let them. But I noticed things, the way I'd notice a small crack in a load-bearing wall. Not alarming at first, just something to keep an eye on. I noticed that Amber stopped asking about me. Early on, she'd always get on the phone when Colin and I talked on Sundays. "How's your knee, Bob? Did you go back to the doctor?" Then at some point she stopped getting on the phone. Then Colin started cutting Sunday calls short. Then the first Saturday lunches started getting rescheduled. I noticed that when I came over for dinner, maybe once a month, Amber was always pleasant but somehow distant, like I was a neighbor who dropped by unexpectedly rather than the man who was literally keeping their mortgage paid. I noticed that when her parents came to visit from Phoenix, I'd hear about it afterward, always as a footnote. "Oh, Amber's folks were in town this weekend. We had a great time. No call ahead of time, no invitation, just the footnote." I told myself it was normal. Young couples need their space. I was probably being too sensitive. Her parents were her parents. My relationship with my son was different, more private, more foundational. I told myself these things, and I kept sending the money on the 1st of every month. Then came the October phone call. Colin called on a Wednesday evening, and right away there was a formality in his voice that he usually only used at work. He said Thanksgiving was going to be a little different this year. Amber wanted to do a bigger celebration, a proper sit-down with both families. Her parents were flying in from Phoenix, her brother and his wife were coming from Denver, a few of their close friends were joining. It was going to be around 15 people, and they'd hired a catering company to handle the food. Sounds great, I said. What time should I be there? There was a pause that lasted about 2 seconds too long. Dad, here's the thing. He lowered his voice, and I remember thinking that was strange, that he'd lower his voice to talk to me. Amber's really been stressed about the seating and the flow of the evening. It's going to be a lot of people who don't know each other, and she's done this whole seating chart. There are name cards and everything. Okay, I said slowly, and she's kind of organized it by, I guess by her side and my side, but really more by like social groups, her colleagues, her family cluster, the friends they have in common. I waited. It's just that you'd be kind of on your own at that end of the table, and Amber thought maybe, and I agree with her, I think she's right, that it might actually be more comfortable for you if you came by on Friday instead. Just the three of us, quieter, we'd do leftovers. You're uninviting me to Thanksgiving, I said. I'm not uninviting you, I'm just Colin. Silence. I'll see you Friday, I said, and I hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's dog barked twice. I'd already bought a pecan pie from the bakery in my neighborhood because it was Colin's favorite since he was 7 years old, and it was sitting in a white box on my counter. I looked at it for a while. Then I thought, I'll go anyway, not to cause a scene, not to force anything. I'll just show up, bring the wine, and see what this actually looks like. So that's how I ended up in the doorway of my son's dining room on Thanksgiving Day, holding the Merlot, looking at 15 people seated around a table decorated with linen napkins and little brass leaf centerpieces, with my son at one end and his father-in-law at the other. His father-in-law, a man named Philip who'd sold a chain of auto dealerships in the 90s and never let anyone forget it, was holding court at the head of the table. Broad shoulders, full head of silver hair, the kind of man who fills a room just by deciding to. He was telling a story, and the whole table was laughing, and my son was laughing hardest. Amber saw me first. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something moved behind her eyes. She came over quickly and pulled me to the side of the room, speaking quietly and warmly, the way you'd speak to someone you'd found wandering in the wrong parking lot. Robert, we said Friday. I thought I'd surprise you, I said. I brought wine. That's really sweet, she said, but we're about to do the toast, and everything's been arranged. There's really not a spot. The caterer set a specific number of places. I can see that. I looked past her at the table. There were 2 empty chairs along the side wall, folding chairs a little apart from the main table, being used as a surface for extra serving dishes and Amber's coat. I count 17 chairs in the room. I'm the 18th. I don't need a name card. She looked genuinely pained, which I'll give her credit for. Then Philip stood up and raised his glass, and everyone quieted down, and he said, loudly, warmly, with absolute command of the room, I want to say how grateful Amber's mother and I are that Colin has made our daughter so happy, and to say that we consider Colin our own son. He looked at Colin when he said it. Colin looked at him like he was the son. I set the wine bottle on the side table next to Amber's coat, and I walked out. I drove home. Put the pecan pie in the refrigerator. Made a pot of coffee. Sat at my own kitchen table in the house I'd owned for 22 years. I thought about my wife. I thought about how she used to say, Robert, you give people too much rope. I thought about how I'd always laughed at that. She wasn't wrong. She was never wrong. She was never wrong. I slept on it. The whole thing. 3 nights, actually. I didn't call Colin. He didn't call me. On the Friday he'd suggested for our quiet leftovers dinner, my phone stayed silent. No call, no text. The invitation had just been a way to soften the first blow, and now even that was forgotten. On Saturday morning, I woke up at 6, the way I always do, and I made my coffee, and I sat down and I thought about it clearly, the way I used to think through structural assessments at work. What is the actual situation here? Not the emotional version, the factual version. The factual version was this. I was sending $1,800 a month to a household that didn't consider me family. I had co-signed a car loan for a woman who organized seating charts to exclude me. I had deposited $6,000 directly into a joint account belonging to two people who, on the most family-centered holiday of the American calendar, could not find a chair for me. I was not a father. I was a funding source, and funding sources, in my experience, can be redirected. I called my bank on Monday morning at 9 sharp. I had the automatic transfer to Colin's account canceled. It took less than 4 minutes. Then I called the loan servicer for Amber's SUV. It took a little longer, but I formally withdrew as co-signer. There's a process for that. Most people don't know it exists, but I'd worked with enough contracts in my career to know how to read the fine print. They'd need to refinance in her name alone within 60 days, which, given her credit score at the time she'd needed me, was going to be an interesting exercise. I didn't call Colin. I didn't send an email. I didn't write a letter explaining myself. I simply stopped. He called me Thursday, 11 days after Thanksgiving, 6 days after the automatic transfer didn't arrive. Dad, the mortgage payment bounced. I know, I said. What happened? Did something go wrong with your account? No, I said. I canceled the transfer. The silence was different this time. Not the polite, managed silence from the phone call before Thanksgiving. Something raw. Why? I thought about explaining it. I thought about saying, because you uninvited me from Thanksgiving while still expecting my money to show up at the table. Because your father-in-law got the seat at the head and I got a parking lot. Because you looked at that man like he hung the moon while I was standing in your doorway with a bottle of wine I'd driven 40 minutes to bring you. I didn't say any of that. I said, I think it's time you covered your own mortgage, Colin. Dad, we can't. You know we can't. You'll figure it out. You're smart. Amber's smart. You have good jobs. You'll figure it out. This is insane. You're doing this because of Thanksgiving? Because we asked you to come Friday instead? I'm doing this, I said, because I've been paying your mortgage for 2.5 years and I didn't get a chair at your table. He started to say something about stress and Amber's anxiety around hosting, and how I didn't understand the social dynamics of managing two families and a friend group. And I listened. I let him talk. When he was done, I said, I hope you two have a wonderful Christmas, and I said goodbye. It's been about 4 months now. I won't tell you everything has been clean and painless, because that would be a lie. There have been nights where I sat in this kitchen and missed my son so much it felt like a physical weight, the kind you feel in your sternum. There have been moments where I second-guessed myself. Was I being too hard? Was the Thanksgiving thing in isolation really worth this? And then I'd remember standing in that doorway. And I'd remember a man who didn't know me well enough to shake my hand getting the seat at the head of the table that a father earns across a lifetime of Sunday calls and pecans and pecan pies and $1,800 a month sent without complaint for 2.5 years. No. I wasn't being too hard. Colin reached out once more, about 6 weeks after that phone call, not to apologize, to tell me that they were working on refinancing the house, that it was complicated, that they might need to sell. He said it in a way that was clearly meant to make me feel responsible. I said I was sorry to hear that, and I meant it. Not guilty sorry, just genuinely sorry that two people who had every advantage were finding out what it felt like to stand without a net. Amber has not contacted me. What I have done in these 4 months is live. I signed up for a hiking group that meets Tuesday mornings in the Catalina foothills, 8 or 9 people in their 50s and 60s, most of them retired, all of them funny in the dry way that desert people tend to be. I've been to 2 concerts. I took a long weekend in Santa Fe and walked around the galleries for 3 days straight and ate green chili cheeseburgers for every meal and felt, for the first time in years, genuinely light. I started thinking about the Alaska cruise I'd always put off. My wife had always wanted to do it. I'd always said we'd get around to it, and then we ran out of time, and the idea went into a drawer where I kept things too tender to look at directly. I took it out of the drawer. I called a travel agent. I booked a 12-night cruise out of Seattle for next September, a solo cabin, window view, glaciers and fishing villages, and all of it. $1,800 a month for 2.5 years is $54,000. I did the math one morning just to see it clearly. Plus the wedding, plus the car cosign, plus the kitchen, plus the $6,000 in the hard quarter. That's a lot of Alaska cruises. I deserve at least one. There's a version of this story where I get the phone call, where Colin calls me on a quiet evening and says, "Dad, I've been thinking, and I want to tell you I'm sorry. We were wrong. I want to tell you that what you've done for us over these years matters, and that the Thanksgiving thing, I should have stood up. I should have made room for you. I'm your son, and that's not who I want to be. Maybe that call comes someday. I hope it does, because despite everything, I still know the kid who used to fall asleep on the couch with his head in my lap watching baseball games, and I don't want to lose him permanently." People can change. People can grow up even when they're already adults. I've seen it happen. But I've also learned, finally, at 63 years old, that you cannot fund your way into being loved. You cannot write enough checks to make yourself matter to someone who has decided you don't. The money was never going to buy me a chair at that table. And the moment I understood that, really understood it, down in my bones, was the moment I got some peace back. I'm still his father. I'll always be his father. But I'm also a man who is 63 years old and has one life left, and I intend to live it like it belongs to me. The pecan pie, by the way, was excellent. I ate it over 3 mornings with my coffee, sitting at my kitchen table by the window, watching the sun come up over the Santa Catalinas. It's a good window. My wife picked it out. She had excellent taste in everything that mattered. I think she'd say I finally listened to her. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. 4 months of quiet mornings and Tuesday hikes and one very good pecan pie. And the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I couldn't have told you clearly while it was all still raw, is that none of this started with Thanksgiving. That day was just the moment the light finally hit the wall at the right angle, and I could see the crack clearly. The crack had been there for a while. Every time Colin lowered his voice to tell me something that should have been said straight, every time Amber talked past me to talk to him, every dinner where I sat at their table feeling like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome in a house I was subsidizing, I kept filling in the gaps with explanations that were generous to them and unfair to me. That's what you do when you love someone. You find the version of events that lets you keep loving them without having to act on what you actually see. But here's what I know now. At 63, that I wish I'd understood at 40, love is not a reason to disappear. You can love someone completely and still require them to treat you like a person. Those two things are not in conflict. I thought for a long time that needing respect meant I was being needy, that asking to matter meant I was being difficult. It took being escorted out of a Thanksgiving dinner, politely, quietly, by my own daughter-in-law for me to understand that I had been confusing generosity with erasure. What Colin and Amber built with my money was real. The house is real. The car is real. The kitchen with the new countertops is real. But what they built of me, in their minds, was a function, not a father, not a man with a history and a grief and a favorite pie and a window he likes to sit at in the mornings. A function. And functions don't need chairs. The moment I canceled that transfer, I stopped being a function. And that, more than anything, is what I'd want anyone in a similar position to hear. Not that you should punish people. I wasn't trying to punish Colin. I was trying to reclaim myself. There's a difference. Punishment is about making someone feel what they did. Reclamation is about deciding you're done organizing your life around people who have organized their lives without you. The consequences that followed, the mortgage scramble, the refinancing, the hard conversations I wasn't part of, those weren't things I did to them. Those were the natural result of a structure that only worked because I was holding it up. When I stepped back, the weight fell where it had always actually belonged. That's not cruelty. That's just physics. I think about the man I was 2 years ago, driving across town every first Saturday for a lunch that kept getting rescheduled, telling myself the drift was normal, it was just life. Young couples are busy. I want to go back and sit across from that man and say, you are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say out loud that you were there first and you are not going anywhere. You are allowed to stop funding a version of your life in which you do not exist. The Alaska cruise is booked for September, 12 nights. Solo cabin, window view. I've started reading about the ports. My wife always said I gave people too much rope. I think what she meant was, don't give so much of yourself away that there's nothing left to come home to. I finally understand what she was trying to tell me, and I'm going home.